and I'll be happy to play a bit of a tour guide for you this evening. And we will cross across many oceans and seas to hear stories that together shed a bit of light on the state of our economic system and the resistance to that state. I will also point you to some of the beautiful temples that are out there before leaving you in the able hands of the other speakers who will then bring you deeper into these temples. These temples, which I will just simply call the Wellbeing Temple, the Doughnut Temple, and the Doughnut Temple. Fasten your seatbelts because we have only 15 minutes, so I'm going to really go fast on this one. Here we go. We start in London. And once upon a time, two Indian villagers visited this beautiful architectural holy St. Paul's Cathedral, and they praised the great stonework that's there. And on that same day in the London city, the bankers walking to their desks in the financial sector, they open their Financial Times newsletter, and in that Financial Times, they find this advertisement. And of course, Photoshop was invented, but it was still a bit of a shock. People didn't really know what was going on. Well, a mining company the same day was holding their annual shareholder meeting, and that company had a $7 billion plan to ruin this. And this is the Niyamgiri Hills, located in the heart of India. And this mining company wanted to turn this whole hill series into rolls and rolls of aluminium folium. And these hills are actually the cathedral of these Indian people who are visiting the cathedral St. Paul's in London. So you can already sense the link between all these mini stories. They wanted to have a bit of revenge for what was happening in India. And of course, the difference is their cathedral is not only where their nature gods live, it's also their source for water and food and medicine. It's their life, it's their livelihood that was at stake. Soon after this London visit, a big investor in the mining company sold the stock it had in the mining company. Let's just say that the Church of England was not very amused that they were exposed for financing less than holy behavior from the mining company, and that the revenge was taken on them. So now that's just an introductory story of the state of our world economy, how everything is connected to everything. And let me just ask a question here. Does this little story already make you think of a certain Hollywood movie? Just checking quickly in the crowd if anyone says, oh, that's like that Hollywood movie. I can't see you all, but if anyone has an idea, just shout. No? Well, and if I do this, then maybe your bell will ring with some people, right? I mean, Avatar, the Hollywood movie, is of course science fiction, special effects, everything that you want from a Hollywood movie. But the story of Avatar is very similar to real life stories that are out there in the real world. Bottom line of the film is like a company colonizes a faraway planet, tries to grab its resources. The locals who live in harmony with nature, they fight back and they win. And of course, the film has dramatic plot twists and special effects and everything. But this is a story that's very common, actually, this kind of story in the world. And how do I know? Well, in the last 19 years, I've been studying conflicts all over the world. And there's a pattern that's cutting across almost all of these conflicts. And that pattern actually was on display recently in Paris. So we continue our world tour from London to India, and now we are going to Paris. And in Paris, at some point, I went to an exposition, Cité des Sciences, and this was the opening of the exposition, this installation. And for me, it was wow, because I was citing this very same graph, which comes from a scientific peer-reviewed paper, everywhere I went in my lectures, and now I had a whole exposition with this three-dimensional installation. What does it show you? Well, it shows you the trends of various indicators that are important for humanity. So in the bottom, in the front, you see the rise of the world population, and then next, the GDP, and then next, like fertilizer, freshwater use, and so on. And the last black line in the end is international travel movements. And for that, they almost had to open the roof because that has risen most of all. And the trend in this is that for 100 to 150 to maybe 200 years, things have risen gradually. until at some point things started to rise exponentially. And that's really a big problem. That's the great acceleration of humanity that we are in. And that great acceleration is actually behind all these environmental conflicts, like in India, like in London, like in the Avatar movie. The professors who did this study, they were really well received, their study, and they were invited in Davos to explain their study 7 times to world leaders. Like, we have a problem, this is accelerating, and we can't continue on a finite planet like this. And that was like, they were basically telling world leaders that, watch out, this is the comet that will hit us. And that was long before this movie Don't Look Up existed. Now, the link is already a little bit clear, I think, but as I have just very little time, I need to move ahead. And the inconvenient truth of all this is that there's a very small but very powerful group of people making mountains of money with activities that are making the lives of an ever larger majority ever more miserable. That's just the reality that we live in. And it gets a bit worse because these same people, they actually know that that's the case, that they are colonizing a future in a way. Guess who made the first documentary on climate change? It was the company Shell in the 90s. They warned humanity like, oh, if you all keep like burning fossil fuels, maybe in the end we'll have a climate problem. Then they invested a few % of their capital in renewable energies. And then they said, not profitable enough. That is not good enough anymore, because they were also convicted in a court case against them for not doing enough on climate change, in a groundbreaking case in the Netherlands recently. And of course, every story needs a few heroes. So let me introduce you to a few of them. Here's a hero, Roger Cox from the Netherlands, who led the court case against Shell, who brought this oil giant on its knees. So that's already hinting you at some of the solutions is going through the courts. This guy, he wrote a book, A Revolution with Justice. He first sued the Dutch state and won, also in appeal in the High Court. And then in Belgium, he started the same climate court case to sue the state for not doing enough, not doing their duty of care, which is, by the way, the third title of mentioning in this little speech after Don't Look Up, Inconvenient Truth. Duty of Care is a documentary about him, really worth watching. And so he's inspiring already 2,000 climate cases against local, regional, or national governments all over the world. So that's one way of resisting the state of affairs that we are in. This is another way, through Sumaira Abdullali. There's another hero of my short list of heroes. And she's fighting the sand mafia in India. Very brave woman. Her finger was broken when she was beaten up by one of the sand mafia people, who told her while he was beating her that his father is the man behind the biggest construction company in the state. Also happens to be the minister for the environment of the state, and of course in cahoots with the police in the state. So she was up to very powerful people, and still after they were beating her, she managed to go to the courts, get victories through the Supreme Court in India, and since then the issue of sand mining and illegal sand mining is a hot topic in India, and she has media interested in it, but it's a very risky affair to work on this. And here's another hero. I'll just end with 3 of the many heroes that I followed in the course of writing a book on them. It's Alexandru. Alexandru is just a little anti-care from Romania, who was also let's say, very frustrated at an American oil company, gas company as well, trying to drill for gas in Romania, pushing aside the locals for this. Really, he saw things on the news in Romania that he found disgusting. And he left his little antique shop to his dad, and he walked to Brussels for 4,000 kilometers, losing a toenail in the process. And when he arrived, by the time he arrived, the Romanian media were all talking about him. We received him. He was in the parliament. And in the end, the company left Romania. Maybe partly due to his actions, because of the public media pressure that was out there. So just giving collective, individual, there is many things that can be done, and that's happening against the state. Yeah, I need to speed up, I'm afraid. I just have little time. So by now, I've also met countless more anonymous activists who together occupy what we call sometimes blockadia, these like places where we jam the fossil fuel industry directly. This is an example from Germany and the Gelande, where thousands of people gather every year with buses coming from all over Europe to block the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Europe, the Gelande coal mine. And well, there are at least like 3,000 of these kind of conflicts of blockadia, where people are resisting some kind of mining project or dam project or mass plantation project. That's mapped in the Environmental Justice Atlas, the largest database of environmental conflicts in the world, which was made together with both researchers and grassroots activists. Let me just say that like every crisis is also an opportunity. And now that I have said that, oh boy, we live in a world full of opportunities, isn't it? I mean, my job is in EB, the European Environment Bureau, is like the federation of the environmental NGOs in Europe, is actually the activist equivalent of a vulture capitalist. Because I'm a vulture activist, you could say. Whenever there is a major world crisis, I smell an opportunity to expose the systemic flaws in our economic system. Whether it's an energy crisis, whether it's an invasion in Ukraine, whether it's a pandemic, all these crises, they offer us an opportunity to show what's really wrong at the ground level of our society and of our economy, from dependencies to patriarchy, to power structure and privilege that's being protected. So what I try to do is always to expose these errors in our system through any big crisis. I just recently published something on that, on the energy crisis, just last Thursday. Why energy justice? Why does that matter? Just if you think of it through 3 questions, like, is the market capable of internalizing all the costs coming with fossil fuel production, extraction, and burning? If not, then, well, then imagine maybe we have a carbon budget, how much carbon we can still put in the atmosphere. Once we accept that there's a carbon budget, where in the whole chain, the value chain, does it make most sense to cap, reduce, and stop the emissions? Is it at the extraction side, at the selling, or at the burning side? And finally, I mean, in your opinion, who is going to do this work? Who is going to lead the work on phasing out the fossil fuels before the carbon budget has been burned up? Is it the consumers, is it the companies, or is it the authorities who is going to have to lead on that? Now, if we need authorities to intervene at the extraction side of the fossil fuel chain, then they will need a few things before such a thing becomes possible. They need to feel pressure from society that they need to do this. That's what Gelande is about. I see a hand. Yeah, I'll try to be quick. They also need alternative measures of progress. They need to unchain their handcuffs, like the energy charter treaty, and they're getting out of it. That's really good news. But in the end, I think our area will not be defined by just like the end of neoliberalism or not, or which economic system is going to now replace neoliberalism. No, in the end, it's about 2 questions. And one question is, hey, Dad, did you colonize my future? And if not, in which part of the resistance movement were you? And I have 2 children, and if it's not your children, then it's going to be your inner conscious. But sometimes these questions are going to come for you. And then if you're unprepared for these questions, then the first job interview you ever did is still going to be a walk in the park. So it's all about what do we do in this state of the world that we have? Which part of the resistance movement do we join, depending on where do we feel good at? Depends on your personality, your situation in life. There are many different ways to participate. And well, I have more to say, but we can maybe keep that for the last part, because I think I just did my 15 minutes now. So there you go, up to the next speaker. And sorry to be so fast. I have so much that I want to share.
Thanks, Nick, for a great presentation. I thought that was fantastic. I'm an activist granddad, and my grandchildren keep asking me those questions. And I'm a dreamer who tries to make my dreams come true and sometimes succeeds. So that's who I am. And it's wonderful to be with you. The way I express about the state of our economy, I use something called the 4 U's, which are to represent the four interlinked and systemic problems that humankind faces at the minute. We basically, our economy is unsustainable, unfair, unstable, and making far too many people unhappy. And just think about that last one for a minute. In our current system, as Nick showed you with the great acceleration, we're running faster and faster, causing massive inequality, burning up the planet, destroying our ecosystems, and we have an economic system that keeps toppling over, and we're not even making ourselves any happier. Now that's pretty stupid, to do all that and not even create happiness. That's bonkers. So this system is one that humans have created and humans can change. And I'm going to tell you about a crucial alternative, and it's an alternative that is fairly widely spread, so it links very closely actually to the Doughnut economy and also to the degrowth economy. But I'm also going to say a bit, which I think is relevant to all the presentations, about not just what we need to change, but how we're going to make that happen. And Nick's already alluded to that in terms of that we need people power to change this, and people power will change it. At its simplest, a well-being economy is one that delivers social justice on a healthy planet. To go a bit more detailed, the goals of a well-being economy, ones that actually occur whether you talk to people, indigenous people, whether you talk to communities across the world, or whether you look at what wise people over the centuries have said that humans want, they keep coming back to the same sort of things. These are the 5 needs that everybody needs and we all deserve. So a well-being economy is a system that meets the needs of all before the wants of the few. So everybody has enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness. A well-being economy is one that ensures not just a just distribution of income and wealth, but critically also time and power. And power probably is the most important. We have to think in terms of changing the power structures in the world. We won't make change without it. A well-being economy is one where all the institutions and businesses are there to serve the common good, to achieve these types of goals. And it's one where people have a say in their economy, feel in control, and as much of the economy as possible is locally rooted. And finally, and absolutely most importantly, it's one where we're not just trying to sustain the natural world, we're trying to restore it. We're trying to live within planetary limits at both global and local level, and repair our biodiversity and repair the things that we've messed up. And it's one that cares about all life, not just human life. And so that's the fundamentals of a well-being economy. What have we got at the minute? Well, what happens at the minute is everybody tries to get the economy to grow bigger, but don't worry too much about what's growing bigger and the damage it does on the way. Then you cost a lot of money to taxes to people. And what you try and do is channel some of that money, not very much often, to helping people on the planet cope with step 1. It's crazy. We're spending in average in most economies something like 20 to 30% of our income in just trying to repair and failing to repair the problems we're causing. Not very sensible. So what a well-being economy is setting out to do is not just equality, yeah, not just equity even, but it's liberation. And fundamentally, it relies on trying to get things right first time. Rather than causing the problems, you aim for the goals you really want and you try and get those right first time. So it focuses on prevention, it focuses on redistribution, which is an ugly word, but it means investing in health, education, living wages for everything, early childcare, etc. You stop the problems before they happen. And I just want to say a bit about, because I said I'd talk about not just the what, but the how. And We All is the leading collaboration of activists, policymakers, movements, businesses, and creators working to transform the economic system. It includes people in the degrowth movement, includes DEAL, the Doughnut Economy Action Lab. So it's pretty wide grouping, and its theory of change has looked at other successful system changes over the years. How did slavery get abolished? How did the civil rights movement work? How did the two big economic changes of the 20th century in the relatively richer parts of the world, the move mid-century to Keynesian education, health, etc., and then the move in late century to Thatcher, Reagan, neoliberalism, and the idea that the market knows best, and we run things according to that. In each case, you saw that 4 key strategies are critical. And the most fundamental of those is creating new power across geographies, across levels, across sectors. Secondly is to promote new and compelling narratives of hope. You need a vision that fits with people's values and who we are as people. You need to support these with a coherent and accessible knowledge and evidence base. What's that mean? It basically means making all the stuff that's written out there accessible to people so they can use, whether they're running a cafe, running a town, or running a nation. Make it possible for people to know what's happening. And secondly, absolutely what Nick's just been talking, finally, I mean, what Nick's been talking about, using the crises as opportunities. That's what we've got to do. And now is the prime time where it's happening. And the great thing about a well-being economy and what's happening in this whole movement is it's already happening. It's on its way. Just WeAll's only been going 4 years, but already we've got 350 organizational members. That includes movements, coalitions, all sorts of people, about nearly 3,000 individual members. You can see lots of academics. As I'll go on to talk about the governments and some of the other things we're doing, but a lot has happened in 4 years, and most of that has happened by volunteer effort. It's because people want this change. You can see it everywhere. So that's been fantastic how that's happening. And one of the things that we managed to catalyze, it's still very early days, is the Wellbeing Economy governments. And we actually helped get this into being. It now runs itself, but interestingly, it also now, just since this slide even, now includes Canada. But New Zealand's been doing a wellbeing budget for the last 3 years. Iceland and Scotland have got a framework of indicators that's far wider than GDP. Wales has a Future of Next Generation Act, and Finland is really strong on getting health education in early years, and doing tar sands, unfortunately, but is talking the right talk. But they're still in very early days, but even with this sort of approach, you can see in Finland and New Zealand, for example, that they handled the pandemic far better and had far less problems because they were thinking about people's well-being before the pandemic, and they were set up to talk about that. So already it's having impact. But when these governments, what does it mean for them? And it basically means not being what we call fair weather friends of growth, not its ever faithful followers. And this is a critical thing to understand. It means you really need to understand that GDP or growth is a means, and often not a very good means. In fact, generally, I say it's not a good means anymore. And you've got to understand what the ends are and who is growing and for what. So we very much believe in dematerializing the economy such that from non-renewables and waste, such that you can fit within ecological limits. So you need to grow some things, human well-being, education, health. In poorer countries, we need to grow the economies. But in other areas, we need to stop growing, or we need to see. So very much it fits with what other people are talking about. But power isn't just going to come from the governments. What's needed, again, is people power to force governments to start pushing in the right direction. And already in countries, it's been perhaps most well developed in Scotland, but we've got about 12 hubs that are already developed, which are groupings of people across sectors. This one in Scotland includes the University of Edinburgh, it includes people from the government, it includes businesses, it includes finance houses, and it includes activists, it includes community groups. And it's that unholy alliance of people that are forcing governments to listen and take notice. And that's what we need all the time. It's what Nick's been talking about already. And it's not going to come just from place-based hubs. It's coming from, we're allying with the climate movement, with other movements, feminist movements, etc., because we need to have all those movements working on changing the economy if it's going to happen. And we need members and individuals. So it's a multi-growing power base. We're trying to catalyze a movement. It's early days, but it's happening. And that's what's so exciting. On the knowledge side, we produced all sorts of hopefully exciting things you can find from our website. And we co-created with 70 members a policy design guide. And what matters about this is you don't just, policies in a wellbeing economy, it's not just what policies you implement, but you do policy making very differently. You need citizens' assemblies, you need to do things from the ground up. And we're piloting that in 4 different communities in different countries. And we're working with policymakers across the world to make this happen. And we're linking here with the Doughnut people in terms of, we'll hear more from Carlota on that. So again, we're trying to link with people and we're trying to tell new stories. It's not just what the problem is, but our stories change so much. So the neoliberals in their way of, free markets, freedom of the individual, small government, strong defense, they told a story. It's a false story, but it was a very powerful story. And they had money and power to push that. But we're trying to tell the opposite story. The economy is us. It's not something separate. It's not some black box. It's unpredictable, emotional, human us. And we're part of nature and we depend on it. So it's those sort of stories. I can only give you a glimpse and we need to do a lot more work. So this is a terribly fast gamble through something that I believe is bold, it's vital, and it's entirely possible. It's already happening. And I think we're well on the way to a different economy. And it isn't just about doing economic things differently. It's about living differently. It's about our values. The word for economics comes from the Greek. It means oikos nomos, the stewardship of the household. And this is about the stewardship of planet Earth. And so this is a way of both the what and the how in a terribly fast thing of a very different system. It's a post-capitalist system. It's a post-patriarchy system. It's a post-colonization system. It's a post-growth system, and it's a post-anthropocentric, can't pronounce the word. And it's happening. And so it's exciting. Thanks all. Bye.
Brilliant, cool. So I'm Carlota Sanz, and I'm co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And so I'm gonna share with you also a bit of, firstly, the very core concepts of Doughnut Economics, but also how we're putting them to practice through Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And I'm not gonna reflect a lot more about, the fact that we are living in a world of crisis. My colleagues now have very well put it and explained it. And just to say that I think more and more this crisis continues to show how we are completely deeply interconnected with each other and with the living planet, right? So all of these crises are continuously hitting the world hard, highlighting the great inequalities of race, gender, wealth, power between some countries and others. And it is more than obvious that this crisis also arise from the systems that we have created. So we've got the power to change them. And so starting from there, what we all, I think, agree is that we need a new vision for the 21st century. And that is precisely what we offer in the shape of the doughnut. So the doughnut, for those who haven't heard of it or don't know much about it, it really offers a compass to guide human prosperity in the 21st century, where the aim is to leave no one falling short of the essentials of life in the whole in the middle. So no one should be falling short on water, food, health, education, Now, these were all crowdsourced from the world's government's sustainable development goals. And so this means that governments in the world have already agreed that every person has a claim in meeting these essential needs. So leave no one falling short, but at the same time, we cannot overshoot the ecological ceiling. And the ecological ceiling is made out of 9 planetary boundaries, which are Earth's life-supporting system that keeps this unique, balanced planet a sweet home for humanity and for all species here with us. So the aim is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet and live inside that safe and just space for humanity inside the donuts. Now, I'm reaching it. All the red in this image shows the extent to which people is falling short on the essentials of life and the extent to which humanity is in overshoot of planetary boundaries. And so the challenge that we have in the 21st century is to eliminate all the red that we're seeing in this picture and coming back to the donut from both sides. And we have never done this before. That's the challenge we have, right? We know that the last century's economics theories, the conventional business models, even traditional development policies were simply not designed to address the challenge. So how can we come back to that safe and just space that the donut offers? Well, we need to fundamentally transform our economies and bring about economies that are regenerative by design and distributive by design. And that's what Doughnut Economics proposes, to change those fundamental dynamics. And I'm going to stop a bit there and talk through what we mean by that. So we know that we have inherited a degenerative industrial system that is taking Earth's materials, it's making them into stuff. We use them for a bit, sometimes only once, and then we throw them away. And this linear dynamic is what is pushing us out of planetary boundaries. So we also know that we can and we need to transform this dynamic into a much more cyclical and regenerative cycle where we use resources far more carefully, far more creatively, far more collectively. So this is one bit. We need to move from degenerative to regenerative. Now, there's another dynamic in place that we need to transform. And we need to recognize that 20th century economies have been designed in many ways through technology, through law, in the ways we have designed our enterprises, our businesses, in ways that tend to concentrate value in the hands of a few. And so what we need to do is to transform these and create economies that share far more equitably value and opportunity with all who co-created it. And so I'm going to just, we could bring a lot of examples of how could we be moving or what it looks like to move from this, from one dynamic to the other. I've just brought a few to illustrate what this could look like. So in terms of becoming regenerative by design, well, we're starting to see a lot of new legislation coming up that is moving towards that new dynamic that we need to bring, like progressive legislation, for instance, the right to repair, which means that people will have the right to repair our equipment. And so legislation that is really moving and it's seeking to end up some of that inbuilt obsolescence that we've built into products. And this is moving us closer to a completely different dynamic that we need in our economy, right? Much more circular, much more regenerative. But also examples like Amsterdam that has the ambition to be fully circular by 2050. But also by 2030, only half of the materials that are being used in the city can be new materials. So this means that the way the construction sector works will have to transform. And then other actions and practices that we're seeing that are moving us towards distributive by design. So for instance, cities like Preston that is using the city's budgets to procure through city administrations, through hospitals, through schools, through museums, to buy locally from small scale businesses and to rebuild that fabric and that web of local small medium enterprises in the community. So it's really creating a distributive ownership of businesses in a much more distributive way. And of course, what would it mean to really move away from the mindset that last century businesses has brought, which is the business of business is business. So how can we redesign businesses so that they are here in the world to really generate social, ecological, community benefits for all? And so these are very briefly some of the core ideas at the heart of Doughnut Economics, which you will know that my colleague Kate Verworth put very beautifully in the book Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And the truth is that when the book was launched, it had a lot of traction and a lot of resonance international. And change makers all around the world started to pick up the concepts and putting them into practice. And so it was very clear at the time when I met Kate in 2019 that these ideas were really ready to jump off the page. And so inspired by the spontaneous uptake of the concepts, Kate and I decided to found Doughnut Economics Action Lab to precisely work with this emergent community of practitioners. And our name is very intentional. So we are focused on turning ideas into action and to learning with and from others through experiments what it means to co-create a new economy. And we always say that we believe that 21st century will be, 21st century economics will be practice first and theorize later. And so that's precisely what we're putting all the focus in working with change makers worldwide to co-create tools and resources around cities, around business, around communities, education that bring these ideas to action, but also to make visible the stories of how pioneers are adapting and using the tools so that we can really inspire others to take action too. So I'm gonna finish my presentation very briefly showing how we've used the concept of the doughnut, which is a concept that it's at a global scale, to downscale it to a specific place so that places and cities around the world can use it to generate transformative change. And we've started applying the concept precisely at the scale of a city, although it's a framework that has been, or is starting to be applied at very different scales, from neighborhoods, regions, and even starting to be explored by some national levels. So the starting question is, how can we live in the doughnuts? And we have enrolled the doughnuts to do this and to explore this question. And so we've managed to bring in the social foundation of the doughnut with the ecological ceiling. And we are asking what it means to thrive in our city here and our relationship with the rest of the living world. So at the heart of this framework, there's a question that we're asking the most ambitious cities and towns in the 21st century. And I'm going to invite you to listen to it from the lens of the city that you live in. And it says, how can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people in the world and the health of the whole planet? And so there's a lot in this question. And what we do is we break it into 4, and we're calling them the 4 lenses of a city portrait. And the first question says, how can all the people in our city thrive? So how can we ensure that all the residents are healthy, connected, enabled, empowered? And all of these are questions, of course, for the people of one place, and they can only be answered by the people of this space. So it's a space that provides the opportunity to have a collective conversation about what it means to thrive and have a decent life here. Now, the second question puts the city and our place in our natural context, and it says, how can our city thrive within its natural habitat? And it asks us, which biome is the city part of, and how can we make sure that our city is being designed in the similar way as the nature works in that place? So we're asking, what is nature's genius here where we live? How is it sequestering carbon? How is it storing groundwater? How is it housing biodiversity? And what would it mean for the city where we live to be acting as generous as the wildland next door? Now, these 2 questions set our aspirations of being thriving people in a place. So it's a local aspiration, and we need to put this obviously within our global responsibility. So we also ask cities, how can our cities respect the health of the whole planet? And so thinking of, where is the timber coming from in the city, the food, the water resources, and where are the carbon emissions being emitted around the world in the name of our city's prosperity, and how can we design our city in ways that that it's like allowing us to come within those planetary boundaries, and not only thinking of the ecology of the ecological impacts, but also on the social impacts worldwide. So how can our city respect the well-being of all people? Now, these four lenses make up what we're calling the city portrait, and in many cases, in most of the cases, have been the very starting point of applying the core ideas of Doughnut Economics at a city scale. And so we shared this methodology a couple of years ago, and it's been just like thrilling and amazing, as Stewart was saying, like to see how much energy there's already there and how many brave and courage and pioneer people and local governments, communities are starting to take up these concepts and really try to implement them within their places, in their own context, in many different ways. And so it's not happening only, or it's happened at different scales. I've mentioned at cities. I think that's where we've had a lot of more traction, or Doughnut Economics has had a lot of traction at the city level. But as I'm saying, it's starting to be also adapted for neighborhoods, for instance, in Birmingham, or regions like Brussels. And it's just exciting to see the many initiatives that have starting to pop up, engaging with the concept. Some of them really led by local governments, but also many of them led by community, led by grassroots, right? So we're just delighted to see that different spread of how practice it's been happening. And I'm gonna just finish my presentation precisely celebrating that practice, celebrating all these innovations and all these pioneers really putting into practice the economy of the 21st century, from local governments that are adopting the tools, the concepts in order to help bring about a new future. Community activists, we're seeing so many amazing initiatives of community activists, like really starting conversations at the street level, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, from Birmingham to Rio de Janeiro. It's like really inspiring to see this just popping up so spontaneously. Teachers and students that are really having a lot of interest in bringing these new ideas to the classrooms, and many times actually outside the official curriculum. So we're delighted to see this. And also architects and designers that are really putting into practice these ideas when designing the spaces of the future. And I'm gonna just finish just celebrating these stories, because we really think that people will be inspired by seeing some people just like themselves doing something that they thought it was not possible. So we're seeing mayors being inspired by other mayors, teachers by teachers, community organizers by community organizers. So really making this story visible matters, so that they can create ripples and create more action. And lastly, just to touch on a point that Stewart also made, we are part of such a much bigger, wider ecosystem that is really working towards economic transformation. So it takes such a rich ecosystem of actors, alliances to have traction on the scale needed to drive change. So no single idea can work on its own. We must connect and respect each other. And so in that sense, we always recognize Dill's narrative as part of a much wider movement that has both ancient and modern roots worldwide. And there's a range of alternative economic possibilities and worldviews we just need to connect, and everyone needs to just like use the one that is most useful to bring change in the place where they're living. So really seeking to work in solidarity alongside so many other interconnected perspectives. It's crucial for the work that we're all doing. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that I haven't gone so much beyond work and time. And yeah, I also invite you to come and visit us in Doughnut Economics Action Lab to see a lot more of what is happening that obviously I haven't been able to share. Thanks so much, and looking forward to the conversation.
just jump straight to the point of what is degrowth. And also, I would like to take the opportunity and discuss some misconceptions around degrowth. So what is not degrowth? And I think many of the things that I will discuss will also apply to some of the questions you might have for the other speakers. So the word degrowth actually goes back to 1972, and Andre Gors, who was the one who examined the relation between growth and capitalism and asked this very fundamental question. Is the Earth's balance, for which no growth or even degrowth of material production is a necessary condition, compatible with the survival of the capitalist system? The degrowth movement lies this argument that our economies cannot grow endlessly, right? So endless growth is an abnormal situation, and we can all agree that it's determined to fail. So degrowth as a theory, but also as a movement, advocates for socially unsustainable downscale of production and consumption of environmentally damaging goods in overdeveloped countries. And there are two things here that I want you to keep in mind, because we'll come back to this: environmental damaging good and overdeveloped countries. Keep that. So in order to stay within planetary boundaries, we have to scale down our energy use. And this does not mean taking certain hours or turning off the lights. Yeah, these are all great, but we also need to scale down unnecessary production and consumption, meaning scale down unnecessary industries like SUVs, like defense industry, fast fashion, meat industry, etc. In that way, by consuming less, not only less energy is required, but also less nature will be degraded and turned into products. So of course, this will entail reductions in aggregate economic activity, as this is often mentioned by GDP. We all know why GDP is not a great indicator, and it has been historically a tight coupling between GDP and emissions. So even if you are like a little bit scared when you hear, oh, yeah, reduction in GDP, well, in fact, I have to tell you that well-being and happiness are not measured with false indicators like GDP. There are many examples that have been discussed a lot, like, for example, Costa Rica. So degrowth does not advocate just for less, but for an idea of radical abundance. This would be a way of life based on modest material and energy needs, but nevertheless reaching other dimensions. It's a life of frugal abundance. So it is about creating an economy based on sufficiency and knowing how much is enough, and actually discovering that enough can be plenty. So the lifestyle implications of degrowth and sufficiency are far more radical than just the light green forms of sustainable consumption that I mentioned before, and require of us all to take more radical measures. That's why degrowth can be a little bit destructive, and that's why it has raised a lot of criticism. So I would like to very briefly show you this graph that circulated a lot in the social media recently on how a degrowth economy might look like, and point out some of these aspects. So expanding the commons and decommodify public goods in order to ensure people's access to the services they need without the need for extra growth. Universal healthcare, basic income, free education, access to water and energy are some crucial sectors that in fact need to grow rather than degrowth. I saw someone mentioning it in the introduction, and that's very, very important. Of course, focus on care work. I think in COVID-19, we all realize how important that is. This idea of sharing among people, and also, of course, distributive justice, meaning that everyone today, but also tomorrow, will have enough to satisfy their fundamental needs. You will see that many of these principles are shared also with the other alternatives that we discussed earlier. So I decided to take a little bit different approach for this presentation, and also talk about what isn't degrowth. And in order to do that, I took as a starting point a tweet that I wrote a few days ago, just on time when Twitter is like slowly dying. I wrote this tweet that says, degrowth is about slowing down and enjoying the ride. Remember to breathe, appreciate small things, consume less, work less, craft things, enjoy art, and create communities of love and care. If that sounds impossible, it's because capitalism makes us believe that. A wonderful tweet, in my opinion. I put as much as I could in the characters that I was allowed to use. And then a lot of, well, I wouldn't call it hate. There was a lot of hate, but I didn't put it on this presentation. A lot of questions came up, and I would like to address some of them. So we have this person that says that degrowth is about denying others your standard of living. You think it's going barefoot and baking your own bread. What if I tell you crafting is so inefficient, you're using more energy than if you just get it in the store? Two ideas here. So first of all, this idea that degrowth means living in caves with candles and going barefoot, right? Degrowth is not primitivism. It's just living a bit more simply. Many of us we are already doing it, right? We're just biking to work. We are vegans. We just try to consume less. And then the other idea about crafting. Nobody says craft everything you need. Jesus Christ, we don't even have time for this. But it's about supporting ethical business, small and family-owned firms, try to buy local. And of course, when you have time and you want, I don't know, to take a ceramic class or painting or reading, you're free to do it, and you're free to exchange what you're making with other people in your community. Then we have this other person that said, those people, referring to Global South, need electricity, a proper stove, electric lights, washing machine, clean water, sewage, but not degrowth. And here's a very big misconception. We have to say that degrowth has a discriminating approach on reducing economic activity. It does not, well, it refers to countries that are responsible for the majority of the emissions nowadays, and countries that have for a long time appropriated the resources of the Global South. So from that perspective, degrowth in the North represents the process of decolonization in the South. That's something that Jason Hickel is advocating, and I'm using his words for this. So in this way, we can release the communities in the South from the pressures of colonization, of extractivism, and of debt, and give them the space to grow, but in their own terms. And there are many movements that actually in the Global South that advocate for an alternative way of growing in the Global South. Look at Boembibi, look at Ubuntu, and many, many more in Latin America recently. Hold on, let me move myself so I can see. Then we have this other person saying that degrowth is the ultimate luxury for the privileged, a bit like voluntary simplicity, but without the voluntary part. Fighting climate change via degrowth is the furthest thing from climate justice. Again, a little bit confused individual here. Yes, there's certain privilege that I'm able to use Twitter, to have the time to think about degrowth, and of course, to advocate for degrowth, right? I'm from the Global North. Degrowth refers to the Global North, as I said earlier, but also I'm privileged enough to be middle class and to be able to get involved in politics without having the anxiety of losing my job or having to make ends meet. So of course, this is a privilege we have to recognize, but also as privileged individuals, it doesn't mean we do not, or we cannot advocate for other people to also have this privilege. Then of course, degrowth is very, very voluntarily. It's the core of the degrowth literature. It's not just consuming less, it's consuming differently, and this has to be decided in a democratic society. Degrowth is planned, is a coherent policy, and requires democratic institutions. Then we have this person with a little bit deterministic evolutionary biology approach that says that organisms are designed to improve their well-being and long-term survival. Generally speaking, relaxing and chilling out is not how nature read into flow determines the loser. I mean, I don't know where to start from this, but I just thought it's like a bit funny to add it. So first of all, this individual is a bit confused about what is well-being, right? Ensuring basic needs and well-being for all implies limiting consumption in high-income countries. Starting from that, it's very important. It's also very well studied how stress, producing by living in dense cities or being stuck in traffic for hours per day or not being happy with your job can actually have a very severe effect on your health and further well-being. I very recently read this book that it's called, hold on, let me see, I lost it, I think. It's about laziness. Laziness does not exist. I think that's the title. And actually the author advocates and says that the capitalistic system is what made us feel unproductive and unworthy. It keeps creating us this feeling that we always have more work. We always need to have something to do. So I would like to quote the fact that he said, I think animals help us remember that we shouldn't have to earn our right to exist. And I think that's a very, very good reply to this tweet. Then another person that said, it sadly means unemployment, poverty, homelessness, starvation, war, revolution, and despair. Again, a lot of things here. I'll just talk a little bit about poverty. I mean, there is this idea that capitalism is going to help the poor. Well, consider briefly that in the last 10 years, only 1% of the growth went to the poor. Relying on economic growth and hoping capitalism will save the poor just simply delays the redistribution that is needed. We do have a lot of food, enough food. We do have enough housing. The problem is that it's accumulating in the hands of the few. So what degrowth advocates for, it's actually redistribution of all these. And then on my next slide, some more funny responses. This is so stupid, I shouldn't waste my time responding, but still they did. The global north, especially the US, invents, discovers, and creates things that enhance human flourishing. We have a moral obligation to produce and buy their products. Well, this argument echoes a bit the arguments that is generally made from colonizers. So extraction and exploitation by the colonizer is for the ultimate good of the colonized, right? We need to keep buying the products from the global south to help them grow. Well, after all, it's true that global south economies rely heavily on exports of raw materials and light manufacturers to the north. And I mean, it is to some extent a reasonable question, but I think this excess consumption that we have in the north should drop in order to avoid ecological breakdown that will disproportionately affect the south and to leave the space in the global south for the development. So in other words, instead of keep using their resources and their labor, cheap labor, give them the space to actually grow. I don't know how I'm doing with time, but I'll just go to the next one. You can see the growth in Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, and the Soviet Union. Europe is degrowing now. Let's see how that works out. Well, I'm not going to go to the North Korea part. And regarding the Soviet Union, I think you can find very easily how the Soviet Union destroyed nature, and it was not as democratic as we might think. And also the same goes probably for Venezuela. As I said, democratic institutions are in the core of the growth. But I would like to talk a bit about Europe and the recession part. So indeed, when the COVID-19 recession hit, some people pointed out that this is probably a degrowth happening, right? But I think that's very misleading, because the growth is in every way the opposite of a recession. It's planned, it's coherent, and of course aims to reduce inequality, to improve well-being. Recessions are not planned, and as we saw with COVID-19, they tend to hit the poor, while the rich became richer. Of course, the growth also has policies like job guarantee with a living wage and care income, and all these were not part of the recession that we lived with COVID-19 or right now with the war in Ukraine. And the last one, it's also about people dying and not getting their healthcare treatments. Our healthcare depends on our industries. The growth is basically proposing human suffering as a solution to global warming. Well, I would like to reply to this person that healthcare is one of the sectors that actually need to grow, and not only they need to grow, but it also needs to be public and accessible to everyone. We see the healthcare systems falling apart and being privatized in many countries. Greece, my home country, actually is in the middle of this discussion right now with everything being privatized. We saw that in the UK. So, I mean, I think this does not require further response. And here I have put following next example, some of the resources that you guys can look into. And I invite you to watch also these interesting YouTube videos and check out a little bit the work that we've been doing on research at the growth, and really looking forward to the questions.